welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida and another deeper drive into the archive. Today I'll be looking at the nearly forgotten Dixie Highway and its path through the Sunshine State. Even today, all roads to Florida are important, as so many visitors to the state drive their cars, and the Dixie Highway was Florida's original tourist road. So join me as I explore its history and take a look at some of the sights that could be seen along the way. Now before I begin, let's quickly look at the name. It comes from a common name for the southern states, Dixie or Dixieland, even though a fair amount of the highway crosses the Midwestern states. The original source for Dixie is much older than the highway, old enough it would seem not to be known. The Oxford English Dictionary even says its derivation is unclear. In any case, from antebellum time up to the present, the southern U.S. has been known as Dixie. While the term wasn't originally pejorative, everything good and bad has been associated with it. Certainly, the illegal secession of southern states to bring about the Civil War, as well as the actions of some white Southerners since then, have caused many people to have a negative opinion of the word. Of course, this video isn't the forum to discuss those issues. Long before Florida's vacationers would arrive by jet, or even by Florida's turnpike and the interstate highway system, there was an organized highway which passed through much of the state, and it put many places in Florida on the national map. The first road system to direct people to Florida, it ran the breadth of the United States from the Michigan-Canadian border to arrive in Miami. It was the first highway to link the rural South with the urban North, helped foster the start of auto tourism, and facilitated the rise of interstate trucking. There isn't a lot of memorabilia directly connected to the Dixie Highway. There's the occasional postcard that shows a location on the highway, but unlike later roads, such as the Orange Blossom Trail and U.S. Routes 17 and 27, I haven't seen any brochures from the time it existed. The photos and documents I'm showing are towns and attractions that were located on the highway and existed between 1915 and 1929, the years that the Dixie Highway operated. To give a quick idea as to the nature of the highway, we can compare it to the interstate highway system. While the Dixie Highway can be considered one of the precursors of the interstates that began in 1956, there were many significant differences. For one, the Dixie Highway was developed by improving the conditions of roads that already existed, while the interstates were new construction built to universal standards. This meant that many roads, which were dirt or gravel, were paved with brick or tarmac, a product that had been patented about a decade earlier. The roads were already interconnected, so the Dixie Highway Association's main job was to choose the route. Secondly, the Dixie Highway was funded by local and state governments, which were often encouraged by local businesses. The benefit of the highway was for the local communities, and so it was funded by them. After 1920, the federal government did provide financial support as it realized that the new highway systems were important for national travel. On the other hand, the interstate system was a national project initiated by President Dwight D. Eisenhower and funded by the federal government. Also, the Dixie Highway would confusingly change its route regularly, making a definitive map of the system over its life all but impossible. As for the interstate system, while there have been some route changes over its life, the vast majority of completed routes haven't changed since their inception. Apart from its rather obvious importance to Florida, the Dixie Highway has another fascinating and significant connection to the Sunshine State. The highway's main promoter was the remarkable businessperson Carl Graham Fisher. An Indiana native, better roads were a major focus of his, including the development of organized road systems that would benefit long-distance motorists. Fisher was a bicycle racer and later an auto racer. He and a partner, James Asbury Allison, would go into business manufacturing acetylene lights for automobiles and would essentially corner the market in the years before electric headlights became practical. Making his first fortune in that business, he would use his money and influence in other automotive projects. For instance, It's Fisher's name that can be connected with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, as it was developed into the Brickyard through his focus on improvements such as laying the brick road surface. One of the major road systems that predates the Dixie Highway was the Lincoln Highway, which ran from New York City to San Francisco. Fisher conceived of the idea of the Transcontinental Road and was a vital promoter of it. Opened in 1913, it only predates the opening of the Dixie Highway by a couple years. Fisher's other contribution to Florida would come a few years later when he was part of a small group of investors that developed a swampy barrier island on Florida's southeast coast, turning it into the city of Miami Beach. His efforts in the early 1920s would make him one of the most important developers in the state, ranking as an equal to Henry Flagler and Henry Plant. In fact, it can be said that Flagler created Miami for the world, and Fisher created its beach. For more on Fisher and the development of Miami Beach, please check out my video on the history of Miami's beach communities. While the long-term results of the Dixie Highway and the development of Miami Beach on Florida are undeniable, Fisher wound up losing his entire fortune through the collapse of the Florida real estate market in the mid-1920s and the 1929 stock market crash, which effectively began the Great Depression. Fisher's idea to connect the Midwest and the South by road was formalized in an organizational meeting in Chattanooga, Tennessee in April 1915. Over 5,000 people attended the first meeting, including the governors of Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida. In May, the newly formed Dixie Highway Association agreed to build two main routes from Illinois and Ohio to Florida. The next year, Michigan joined the project, and the planned routes were eventually extended to the Canadian border. When completed, its two main routes and many connecting spurs provided safe and comfortable roads for travelers. The eastern route went from Sault Ste. Marie down through Detroit, Cincinnati, Richmond, Knoxville, Asheville, Greenville, and Savannah to Jacksonville, and along the coast to Miami. The western route began in Chicago and passed through Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville, Atlanta, and on through to Tallahassee. From Tallahassee, it would head to the central part of Florida, passing through Gainesville, Ocala, Leesburg, and Orlando, and then to the Gulf Coast at Fort Myers and Naples, and then through the Everglades over to Miami. This route through the center of the Florida Peninsula almost didn't happen. The original plans were to have the route head directly east from Tallahassee to Jacksonville to meet up with the eastern route. It was only through frenzied lobbying efforts of Central Florida politicians that the central part of the state was put on the map. That run from Tallahassee to Jacksonville was also created, with the highway running through rural North Florida and the towns of Monticello, Madison, and Lake City before reaching Jacksonville. The Dixie Highway facilitated the first major influx of tin can tourists into the state, and soon dozens of camping grounds for families were set up along the highway. The term tin can tourist was used to describe the intrepid vacationers who traveled long distances by car, many of them by Henry Ford's ubiquitous Model T, before the development of roadside motels, restaurants, and rest stops. They typically carried their food with them, much of it in tin cans. The majority of these visitors were interested in exploring the countryside and were enticed to Florida by the hundreds of road signs along the Dixie Highway touting roadside attractions such as Silver Springs, the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, Moosa Isle, Wakulla Springs, and McKee Jungle Gardens. While Florida's golden era of tourism wouldn't start until the late 1940s, it had its roots in the early 1920s. If it wasn't for the Great Depression and World War II, who knows how the tourism industry would have grown in the 30s and 40s. By 1929, the Dixie Highway was officially no more, but that didn't stop its use. The federal government, really the only entity with any money in the Great Depression, took over management of the Dixie Highway and renamed it to rather less romantic numbers. In Florida, it was mostly transformed into U.S. routes 1, 17, 27, 41, 90, and 441. Of course, most of the route still exists today. Once you make a road, it's nearly impossible to get rid of it. It is rather difficult to follow, however. The name still exists as well, though it's only tied to a few Florida cities and towns, such as Lady Lake, Stuart, Lake Worth, Fruitland Park, Vero Beach, and Leesburg, who have all continued to use the name Dixie Highway. Taking a look at the three main Dixie Highway routes, Tallahassee to Naples and to Miami, Jacksonville to Miami, and Tallahassee to Jacksonville, we can see that they enabled drivers to get within about 50 miles of any place in the state, with the exception of much of the Panhandle. The estimated population of the state was only 800,000 in 1915, yet the next 14 years would see some tremendous growth as Florida's population would nearly double in that span of years, and the Dixie Highway was part of the reason. Tallahassee is the first city that visitors would experience as they entered the state on the western route. It grew from 5,000 to 10,000 inhabitants during the years of the highway. By the way, I'll be using rounded off population numbers throughout this part. Tallahassee is Florida's capital, so not surprisingly, some of its tourism sites were government buildings, including the Governor's Mansion completed in 1907, and designed to look like President Andrew Jackson's Hermitage Estate in Nashville, Tennessee, and the much older Capitol Building, completed in 1845, just before Florida achieved statehood, and which today houses the historic Capitol Museum. A less obvious landmark, but one of my favorites, would be the Old City Cemetery, which was established in 1829, only 8 years after Florida became a U.S. territory. It's the final resting place for many Floridians who contributed to the development of the city and the state. The town of Perry, located southeast of Tallahassee, is the seat of Taylor County, officially known as the tree capital of the South. Its population also nearly doubled between 1915 and 1929, from 1,500 to 2,800. One of the buildings Dixie Highway travelers would see was the Live Oak, Perry, and Gulf Rail Depot that was built in 1918. The rail line connected Perry to another Dixie Highway stop, albeit one on the west to east route, the town of Live Oak. The LOP&G was one of the busiest timber short-line railroads in the state. No longer an active depot, the station was renovated and as of 2021 operates as a welcome center. Continuing into the peninsula, the highway reached Gainesville, a smaller city in the northern central area. It became the permanent home to the University of Florida. Its population grew from 6,500 to 10,000, and because of the university, it was one of the first towns away from the coast to build hotels for a reason other than tourism. Later, Dixie Highway travelers would have witnessed the construction of the John F. Siegel Building. While construction began in 1926, the money ran out and it wasn't completed until a decade later. At 11 stories, it continues to be the tallest building in the city, and when it was finally completed, it served the university for over 30 years. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1982 and has been restored. South of Gainesville lies Ocala, a city well known as the center of thoroughbred horse community in the state. But in terms of Florida's tourism industry, Ocala plays second fiddle to nearby Silver Springs, arguably the oldest continually operating attraction in the state. Now part of the Florida State Park system, the location has been welcoming visitors since before the Civil War. It's believed that the first of Silver Springs' glass-bottom boats were used in 1878. The springs are located just east of Ocala, seat of Marion County, which was established in 1849. During the time of the highway, its population grew from 4,600 to 7,000. The Dixie Highway continued to the southeast through the rolling hills and lakes of Lake County, and turned to Orlando, the small interior city which likely grew the most during this time frame, from 7,000 to 25,000 in population. Known today as the home of Walt Disney World, Orlando is arguably the #1 tourist destination in the world. At the time of the Dixie Highway, it was considered to be the center of the Florida citrus industry. The centerpiece of the city has always been Lake Eola, located on the east side of what is now the downtown business center. Lake Eola has been the site of uncounted concerts, festivals, and other events, and has thus gone through numerous updates for over 130 years, and is one of the most popular parks in the city because so many people live and work within a few blocks. Now, for the first time, the Dixie Highway turns to the west, once leaving Orlando. Kissimmee's fame stems from the Florida cattle industry, still one of the largest in the country. In fact, America's largest cattle ranch is located in Florida. Known officially as the Deseret Ranches, it's a massive complex owned by the Church of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as the Mormon Church, and it's contained within Osceola, Orange, and Brevard counties. Kissimmee is the seat of Osceola County and Florida's cattle capital. Its population grew from 2,400 to 3,000 and thus showed little growth. The area would remain rural until the late 1960s when Walt Disney World started construction and the area was thrust into the role as a tourism center. The Osceola County Courthouse, which was built in 1889, is the oldest courthouse still being used as such in the state. While there are newer courthouse buildings nearby, the historic courthouse continues to be employed by the county. Arcadia is located to the southwest on the way to Fort Myers and the Gulf Coast. Like much of the interior of the state, the small city is surrounded by farmland and natural resources. It's on the Peace River, which starts near Bartow and runs to Gasparilla Harbor. Its population grew from 2,500 to 3,800. Along the seats of DeSoto County, much of its downtown area hasn't changed significantly for over 100 years and was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1984. One of the most important structures is the DeSoto County Courthouse, constructed between 1912 and 1913. It was renovated in 1976 and is considered one of the more architecturally important courthouse buildings in Florida. Passing through the city of Fort Myers on the Caloosahatchee River, the highway reached Naples. While it's a moderate-sized city today, at the time it was little more than a village. It became the seat of the newly founded Collier County in 1923, and its first rail connection didn't happen until 1927. The population was around 200 to 400 inhabitants. Still, after the end of the Dixie Highway, the town would begin to grow. Naples was home to one of the first botanical gardens in Florida, Henry Nehrling's Tropical Garden and Arboretum, the sister facility to Nehrling's Palm Cottage Gardens near Orlando. Both of Nehrling's gardens were a combination of research facility and public gardens. I'm showing images from the Caribbean Gardens because it was built later on the same land as Nehrling's. From Naples, the highway heads due east across the Everglades and reaches Miami. Since that's also the end point of the eastern route, I'll cover Miami then. The route that covers the northern part of the state from Tallahassee to Jacksonville follows U.S. Route 90 through Greenville, the birthplace of the remarkable musician Ray Charles, to Madison, the seat of Madison County. The county was created in 1827 and the town was founded in 1838. During the existence of the Dixie Highway, the population rose from 1,700 to 2,000. Madison has a beautiful and well-kept downtown, including the Four Freedoms Park on Route 90 that's dedicated to the four freedoms President Franklin Roosevelt defined in 1941. Freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. The monument located in the park was dedicated in 1944 to Army Air Corps Captain Colin Kelly. Kelly was killed in action while piloting his Boeing B-17C Flying Fortress. Before the bomber exploded, killing Kelly and one other crew member, the captain was able to keep it flying long enough for the 6 other crew to parachute safely out. Continuing eastward, the route passes through Live Oak, the seat of Suwannee County. The county was named after the famous river, while the city was named for the southern live oak tree, one of the most iconic trees in the South. A random fact about the city is its boundaries form a square. As mentioned before, it was connected with the town of Perry along the tracks of the Live Oak, Perry, and Gulf Railroad. The city has two former depots, the Union Depot and the Atlantic Coastline Freight Station. I covered these in a previous video that you can see here. Live Oak actually saw a decrease in its population from 3,200 to 2,800, partly because of the destruction of cotton crops by the boll weevil, as well as a downturn in the popularity of the local sulfur springs due to the realization that the waters did little to combat various illnesses. The west to east route of the Dixie Highway ends in Jacksonville, while the eastern route passes through the city after crossing the Georgia-Florida border. Throughout the 14 years of the highway, Jacksonville maintained its status as the state's largest and most cosmopolitan city. Its population grew from 70,000 to 125,000. Located at the mouth of the St. Johns River, the waterway that drove the economy of East Florida in the 19th century, the city was Florida's largest for many years because it's so close to the rest of the country. Plus, the development of the steamship allowed the St. Johns to be used as a commercial highway for nearly 150 miles. One of the more popular attractions in the city at the time was the Florida Ostrich Farm. As you can see, it was a collection of ostriches, some of which were raced with jockeys, while others pulled carts. Mostly, they seemed to just hang out much like they do in zoos today. I hope to do a video on the important exotic animals in Florida in the near future, and I'm sure the ostrich will make the list. South of Jacksonville lies St. Augustine, North America's oldest city. Founded by the Spanish in 1565, it has been under the control of the Spanish, British, and the U.S. During the time of the Dixie Highway, its population grew from 5,700 to 12,000. It's a remarkable little city with much in the way of historic sites. Even 100 plus years ago, there was plenty that was already historic for the tourists to visit. One of the places that wasn't all that old, however, was the St. Augustine Alligator Farm. Founded in 1893, it's likely the oldest zoo still operating in the state, and it's located on Anastasia Island, not far from St. Augustine. While the Bridge of Lions that connects the island with the city wasn't completed until 1927, visitors could drive over an earlier wooden bridge to get to the beach and see both the lighthouse and the alligator farm. Leaving St. Augustine behind, travelers would reach what would become the world's most famous beach. The wide beach with hard-packed white sand had been in use as a road surface before the arrival of the auto, and it didn't take long for it to be used for racing cars. Opened in 1902, the Daytona Beach and Road Course would be one of the earliest and most significant racing venues in the U.S. and would lay claim to 15 world speed records. It'd be instrumental in the founding of NASCAR, the National Association of Stock Car Racing, and the early growth of Daytona Beach, which saw its population rise dramatically during the Dixie Highway era, going from 500 individuals to 15,000, a 30-fold increase not matched by any other Florida city listed here. Oak Hill is still a small town today. Census data began being collected there in 1930, at which point it had 357 residents. In pre-Columbian times, much of the Atlantic coast of Florida was populated by indigenous people from several different tribes. In the Oak Hill area, the middens, large mounds of discarded shells and other refuse, can be dated back to at least 4,000 years ago. These middens can be found at Seminole Rest, which is part of the Canaveral National Seashore, and can be explored by visitors. It's one of Florida's largest midden sites open to the public. Seminole Rest is on the shore of the Mosquito Lagoon and is on the National Register of Historic Places. Vero Beach is at the northern end of the Treasure Coast, named for the numerous Spanish treasure shipwrecks located offshore. It's the seat of Indian River County and is, not surprisingly, on the Indian River. Its population grew from 500 to 2,100 inhabitants as the town developed into one of the most important centers of citrus production. The Indian River isn't a river in the usual sense. It's actually a lagoon containing brackish water that lies between the Florida mainland and several barrier islands. The Indian River is an unusual formation that has several smaller rivers empty into it and has several inlets that directly connect it to the Atlantic Ocean. It's over 100 miles long and averages less than a mile wide. In pre-Columbian times, the shores of the river were the home of thousands of indigenous people. West Palm Beach is located west of the city of Palm Beach, one of the earlier ocean resorts created by Henry Flagler's Railroad. Commonly called West Palm, it's the city that the Dixie Highway served as travelers would enter the Gold Coast, which ran south to Miami. Its growth was measured by the population increase from 5,000 to 25,000, and it was where many of the staff of the Palm Beach resorts lived. In fact, it was platted by Flagler's surveyors specifically for that purpose. West Palm lies on the shore of Lake Worth and faces Palm Beach, which is located between the lake and the ocean. At the time the area was first settled by white Americans, the lake held fresh water that came as seepage from the Everglades. Beginning in the mid-19th century, dredging projects opened up inlets on the eastern shore and created barrier islands and turned the lake from fresh to brackish water, thereby radically changing the ecosystem. Today it's a lake in name only and is part of the Intercoastal Waterway. Finally, the two routes met in Miami. Today, Miami is not only the largest metro area in the state, and in many ways it shapes the economy and government, but more than 100 years ago it was a small city on Biscayne Bay, one that held a great deal of promise, but had little else. Still, the population would grow nearly tenfold during the era of the Dixie Highway, from 12,000 to 108,000. One of Miami's first attractions was located on the Miami River. Created by John Roop in 1907, Moosa Isle began as a basic fruit shipping attraction. In 1919, Roop leased part of his property to a Seminole man named Willie Willie. Willie and his father, Charlie Willie, invited other Seminoles they knew to move to the property and set up camp over the winter as an additional attraction, and Moosa Isle's Seminole Indian Village was born. The Seminoles would wear traditional clothing, practice their crafts, cook food, and interact among themselves and with the public, all the while living on the grounds. It's believed that alligator wrestling was more or less brought to popular attention at Moosa Isle. So there's little doubt to the importance of the Dixie Highway to the southern U.S. and especially Florida. For the first time, it made the Sunshine State a tourist destination for the average American. No longer would it be a vacation spot for just the wealthy or backcountry adventurers. Thank you for watching another of my videos. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to learn more about Florida's tourism history. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around Sunshine State.